Today's story might change the way you see one of America's biggest heroes, the legendary Neil Armstrong. You know him, the astronaut who commanded Apollo 11, the first man to set foot on the moon. But did you know that America's celebrated space pioneer died due to a botched surgery? And what's more shocking is that his family was handed $5 million to keep quiet about it. But now, the truth is out, and we know who the murderers are. Let us just show you what we found out. Neil Armstrong was born on August 5th, 1930, in Wapakoneta, Ohio. He was always a curious kid who loved flying. It was his love of flying that made him a world-famous astronaut. Before Neil made those historic steps on the moon, he loved planes and flying. In fact, did you know he got his pilot's license before he could even drive a car? Neil received his aerospace engineering degree from Purdue University, and after that, he served as a naval aviator. After that, Neil joined NASA in 1962. It was the same year when his training for space started. We can only imagine how tough it would have been. You have to be fit, smart, and ready for anything. Neil had all that in spades. Talking about health, especially heart health, Neil was in tip-top shape. Being an astronaut is no joke. You can't just hop into a rocket if your heart health is not good. Neil's heart was checked out all the time, and he always passed with flying colors. This was important for him to handle the stress of shooting up into space and floating around at zero gravity. After his big moon landing in 1969, Neil decided to step back from going on more space missions. He hung up his astronaut suit in 1971 and switched to teaching in the University of Cincinnati. He loved sharing his knowledge, but he was not too keen on staying in the spotlight. Neil liked keeping things low-key when it came to his life post-moon landing, which is why he chose to spend the rest of his days at the University of Cincinnati. Life went smoothly after that, but then, in 2012, when he was 82, everything changed. His doctors told him he needed heart surgery, specifically a cardiac bypass to clear up some blocked arteries. This is pretty common for people as they get older, even for someone as fit as Neil. The surgery finally happened, and it seemed like everything went well. To treat blockages in his heart vessels, Neil underwent vascular bypass surgery, which is as common in US people as apple pie. Most of the time, there are no complications, since this has become a common procedure. Dr. Todd Rosengart, who is DeBakey Bard Chair of Surgery at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, chimed in with some reassuring stats. He said that he had done more than 4,000 heart procedures under his belt over a 30-year span, which means he knows his stuff. He said he was confident in the procedure because, for the right patient, this surgery is a life-altering procedure. But this is not what happened with Neil. At first, Neil was recovering and things looked good, until they didn't. Out of nowhere, Neil started to experience some post-surgical complications. And then, after just a week of his surgery, on August 25th, 2012, the world lost its first moonwalker. Neil Armstrong's death was a shock to everyone. He was supposed to be improving and was supposed to come back to teach at the university, but suddenly, he was gone. Turns out, Neil's family found out how the hospital poorly handled his surgery. They believed that some serious mistakes were made during his treatment. Then the rumors started swirling around. Neil Armstrong, who used to be a national treasure, did not just pass away from complications post-surgery. It looked like there might have been some serious missteps in how his care was handled. Now, we didn't receive much information about it back then, but 7 years after the surgery, the New York Times reported something shocking. They reported that after the surgery and Neil's death, his family had quietly received a $5 million settlement from Mercy Health Fairfield Hospital in Cincinnati, where his surgery took place. The story came to light in a pretty dramatic way. The Times claims that there was an unknown person who sent the details to the Times. Now, we will show you what reportedly went down at the hospital. After his emergency bypass surgery, the doctors put in temporary wires to stabilize Armstrong's heartbeat. These wires are pretty standard for the procedure he had, but when they removed the wires, big problems started. Armstrong began to bleed internally. His blood pressure increased to dangerously high levels, and what followed was a series of questionable decisions made by the doctors. In such a situation, the doctor should have rushed him directly to the operating room where immediate surgical intervention could happen. But instead of doing that, he was first taken to the hospital's catheterization lab. Why there, you might ask? That's a good question, and one that experts would later scrutinize heavily. About a week after these frantic and perhaps misdirected medical maneuvers, Neil Armstrong passed away. Right after Neil's death, this case became a major public scandal. Rumors of medical malpractice started floating around. The whole situation could have been blown up into a massive legal battle. It was a scandal big enough to tarnish the reputation of the hospital involved. On one side, it was the hospital trying to save their reputation. On the other side, it was Armstrong's sons, Rick and Mark, who were never going to let the hospital get away with the botched surgery. They suspected that the hospital's care might not have been up to standard, and they were ready to press charges. Ashish Jha is an adjunct professor of global health at Harvard. He looked over the case details and was confused by the choices made by the medical team. He pointed out that if someone's blood pressure drops massively and they are bleeding internally, the operating room is usually where you would want them, stat. The cath lab decision did not make much sense to him, especially under such critical circumstances. Jha even questioned the initial decision of Neil's doctors to go for emergency bypass surgery. According to him, Armstrong's tragic death might have been completely avoidable. This kind of statement certainly makes you think about the medical decisions we often take for granted as being in our best interest. Dr. Todd Rosengard was not involved in Armstrong's case, but talked about how often cognitive errors can happen in medicine. Rosengard explained that making a mistake does not necessarily mean someone was incompetent or that the case was malpractice. Often these are just human errors, the kind that we are all prone to make. That's why, in medicine, there is a big push for systems that help prevent these mistakes. But even so, a mistake was made and it cost a life. It was the 45th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission that year, so the timing for a scandal could not have been worse, or better depending on how you look at it. Mark's wife Wendy, who is also a lawyer, sent a pretty sharp email to the hospital. She threatened them to go public with their grievances. She pointed out that the fallout from such a scandal would cost the hospital much more in reputation damage than any money they might lose in court. It was a clear threat. They had to either settle this quietly or brace for a storm. So what did the hospital do? They decided that silence was golden. In 2014, they reached a secret settlement and paid $6 million to avoid dragging their name through the mud. Of that, $5 million went directly to Armstrong's sons. It was a big sum to pay for peace, but probably a wise choice considering the alternative. Now, the thing is Neil's widow, Carol, who was completely out of this deal. She made it known that she did not agree to stay silent even after this settlement. This disagreement started a fight among family members. Not everyone was on the same page about how to handle Neil's legacy. On the other hand, the hospital was fighting for its life. The hospital itself was disappointed when details of the settlement leaked. They had hoped to keep things private, not just to protect themselves, but because no hospital wants to be known as the place where a national hero died under questionable circumstances. Despite all the legal drama and the secret settlements, it is sad to realize how common these situations are. According to Michelle Mello, who is a law professor at Stanford, most medical malpractice cases never see the inside of a courtroom. They get settled out of court. And while a $6 million payout might seem large, for a case involving someone as famous as Neil Armstrong, it was not considered excessive by experts. After the dust settled on the legal front, Armstrong's sons auctioned off thousands of their father's personal items and made over $12 million. They talked about using some of that money to start a foundation and donate to charity. It was their way of trying to turn a personal and public tragedy into a force for good. This whole story shows just how complicated things can get when a public figure like Neil Armstrong is involved. The situation with Neil Armstrong's surgery made everyone realize how important it is for hospitals to strive for competence and precision. After his surgery, when he started bleeding inside, the hospital did not act fast enough. Instead of rushing him straight to surgery where they could stop the bleeding, they took a slower route and went to the catheterization lab first. This delay might have cost him crucial time. But on the other hand, we also agree with Dr. Todd Rosengard, who pointed out that mistakes can happen in hospitals and they are not always someone's fault. It is true. Medicine is complicated and even the best doctors can face unexpected problems. But how these problems are handled makes all the difference. In Armstrong's case, faster and better decisions could have possibly saved his life. This situation really shows why hospitals need to always be sharp and ready to act fast. Quick thinking and action are super important, especially in emergencies. If Armstrong had gotten the right help quicker, he might have had more time to share his amazing stories. His experience is a big reminder that hospitals need to keep improving and making sure they do their best to take care of everyone. So, what do you think? Was it the hospital's incompetence that cost Neil his life, or just Neil's poor luck? Let us know in the comments below. Before you go, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking stories. Thanks for watching. See you next time.